Rejected mail-order bride thought no one wanted her, until the giant mountain man grabbed her hand. She stepped off the train with one suitcase and found nothing but laughter and scorn. The man who promised to marry her had taken another bride. Dust swirled, church bells tolled, and the crowd jeered as the last train rolled away. Alone, humiliated, unwanted. But then, a shadow fell across the street. A scarred giant, feared by the town, reached out his hand. One touch silenced the mockery and set her life on a path no one could have imagined. In the mountains, she finds refuge, but also a secret battle. The railroad wants his land. A half-starved orphan hides in the timberline, and a preacher's buried truth could change everything. She was sure she had been thrown away. He believed he was too broken to be loved. Together, they stand at the edge of ruin and redemption. Will this unlikely family survive the storm of greed, prejudice, and betrayal? Or will the hand that saved her once slip away forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden platform of Dutch Creek's train station. Steam billowed in great clouds as the locomotive screeched to a halt, its iron wheels grinding against the rails. Sophia Whitfield clutched her worn valise tighter, her knuckles white beneath her gloves as she descended the steep steps onto the platform. Her faded blue traveling dress, though carefully pressed, showed signs of the long journey from Boston. She had chosen it specially, wanting to make a good first impression on the man who had promised to be her husband. Now she stood alone, her heart pounding as she scanned the crowd for the face she'd seen only in a daguerreotype. "That's Howard Mitchell's mail-order bride," a woman's voice carried across the platform, sharp with gossip. "Poor thing doesn't know." Sophia's stomach clenched. "Know what?" she wanted to ask, but her throat had gone dry as dust. A man in a shopkeeper's apron nudged his companion. "Should we tell her Mitchell got hitched to Sally Jenkins last month? Guess he forgot to mention it in his letters." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, grateful for the solid weight of her valise to steady herself. The train's whistle pierced the air, and she turned to see it pulling away, taking with it any chance of escape from this nightmare. "Reckon she's used goods?" a rough voice called out. "Why else would a Boston lady come all the way out here?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sophia felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high, even as tears threatened to spill. The platform seemed to shrink around her, faces pressing in with cruel curiosity. The setting sun painted everything in harsh copper light, making the moment feel like a fever dream. "Look at her fine airs," someone sneered. "Won't be so proud when she's spending the night in the street." Sophia's legs trembled. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. But where could she go? The money for her return ticket had been spent on supplies for her new life, a life that had evaporated like morning mist. Then, a deep voice cut through the growing darkness and cruel laughter. "That's enough." The crowd fell silent as heavy boots thudded against the wooden planks. A massive figure emerged from the shadows near the station house, moving with the deliberate grace of a mountain lion. Sophia caught her breath as the man stepped into the light. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to cast their own shadow. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to jaw, partially hidden by a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were plain but clean. Dark trousers, a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing powerful forearms. But it was his eyes that held Sophia's attention. They were the color of storm clouds, and while his expression was stern, those eyes held something gentle, almost wounded. "Andrew McGraw," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd like wind through prairie grass. The townspeople drew back, their earlier bravado melting away beneath his steady gaze. Without a word, he strode forward until he stood beside Sophia. His massive hand engulfed hers, calloused palm warm against her trembling fingers. The touch was firm but careful, as if he were handling something precious and fragile. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Allow me." He took her valise with his free hand, and Sophia found herself falling into step beside him. The crowd parted like water around a boulder, their whispers now tinged with shock rather than mockery. She caught fragments of hurried conversations. "McGraw never comes to town unless... What's he doing with... Lives up in that valley alone." But Andrew's grip remained steady, anchoring her in the chaos of this terrible moment. As they walked away from the platform, Sophia felt her racing heart begin to slow. The humiliation that had threatened to drown her receded, replaced by a strange sense of safety she couldn't quite explain. The sun dipped lower, painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose. Their shadows stretched long before them as they made their way down the town's main street. Andrew's stride was unhurried but purposeful, and Sophia found herself matching his pace without difficulty, despite her shorter height. She wanted to thank him, to ask why he had stepped forward when everyone else seemed content to watch her suffer. But the words stuck in her throat, and somehow the silence between them felt more comforting than any conversation could be. They passed the general store, its windows already lit against the gathering dusk. Inside, she could see curious faces pressing against the glass, but Andrew's presence seemed to create a bubble of dignity around them, shielding her from their stares. The last rays of sunlight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and Sophia noticed that his clothes, while well-worn, were meticulously clean. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his own strength and had no need to prove it to others. As they walked, the cruel laughter of the train platform faded into memory. In its place, Sophia felt something unexpected stirring in her heart. Not hope, perhaps, but the first fragile seeds of possibility. This strange, scarred man had transformed her moment of deepest shame into something else entirely, though she couldn't yet say what that might be. The twilight deepened around them, bringing with it the evening sounds of the frontier town. Doors closing, horses nickering in their stables, the distant howl of a coyote. But Sophia was no longer afraid. The hand holding hers was strong and sure, leading her away from the wreckage of her plans and toward... what? She didn't know. But for now, being away from the cruel faces and mocking voices was enough. Their footsteps echoed in unison on the wooden sidewalk, and overhead the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of sage and wood smoke. Yet, despite the growing chill, Sophia felt warmer than she had since stepping off the train, protected by the presence of this silent guardian, who had emerged from the shadows when she needed him most. They continued walking as Dutch Creek settled into evening, the unlikely pair moving through the gathering darkness like figures in a story she never expected to be part of. Andrew's grip remained steady, a promise of safety in a world that had just turned itself upside down. Andrew's steady hand guided Sophia through Dutch Creek's main street as the crowd melted away into the deepening twilight. Her legs trembled with each step, threatening to buckle beneath her, but his firm grip kept her upright. The warmth of his calloused palms seemed to flow through her, lending her strength she didn't know she had left. The windows of Jensen's Mercantile glowed with lamplight, and curious faces pressed against the glass. Mrs. Jensen's round face appeared particularly prominent, her eyes wide as she watched the unlikely pair pass by. Sophia heard the muffled sound of voices through the window panes, no doubt already spinning tales about the strange sight of Andrew McGraw escorting the abandoned mail-order bride. They reached the hitching post where two animals waited patiently, a sturdy brown mule and a tall bay horse. Andrew released her hand only long enough to secure her valise to the mule's saddle. Then he turned to her, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "Ma'am," he said softly, lacing his fingers together to make a step. "Let me help you up." Sophia gathered her skirts and placed her boot in his offered hands. With surprising gentleness, he lifted her onto the mule's back. The animal stood perfectly still as if sensing her uncertainty. Andrew adjusted the stirrups with efficient movements, ensuring her comfort without unnecessary words. In one fluid motion, he swung himself into his horse's saddle. The leather creaked beneath his weight as he settled, gathering the reins in practiced hands. With a gentle click of his tongue, he urged both animals forward, leading her mule by its lead rope. They rode in silence through the outskirts of town, hooves crunching against loose gravel. The sound seemed to echo in, the quiet night marking their steady progress away from the nightmare at the train station. Sophia's hands clutched the saddle horn, her knuckles white with tension, but the mule's steady gait slowly began to soothe her frayed nerves. The trail turned upward, winding into the foothills that rose dark against the night sky. Above them, stars began to appear, scattered like diamonds across black velvet. The air grew cooler as they climbed, carrying the sharp scent of pine and sage. Sophia drew her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, grateful for the warmth of the mule beneath her. As the lights of Dutch Creek faded behind them, her initial fear of being alone with this stranger began to shift. Curiosity crept in, replacing some of her anxiety. Who was this mountain man who had stepped forward when everyone else stood back? His massive frame and scarred face had frightened her at first, but his actions spoke of nothing but gentleness and consideration. They rode for what felt like hours, though it was hard to mark time in the darkness. Occasionally, Andrew would murmur quiet warnings about low branches or steep portions of the trail. His voice, when he used it, was surprisingly soft, as if he were conscious of disturbing the night's peace. Finally, Sophia gathered her courage. I have no family west of the Mississippi, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The confession felt important somehow, though she wasn't sure why she needed him to know. Andrew was quiet for so long she thought he might not respond. Then his deep voice rumbled back, "You can rest at my cabin until morning. Nothing else needs deciding tonight." The simple statement carried more comfort than any elaborate promises could have. He wasn't asking questions or making demands, just offering shelter when she needed it most. The trail curved around a steep hillside and suddenly a cabin appeared, nestled against the mountain's shoulder. Lamplight flickered through its windows, casting a warm glow on the rough-hewn logs. A small barn stood to one side and a garden patch was visible in the starlight, surrounded by a sturdy fence. Andrew dismounted first, his boots crunching in the gravel. He helped Sophia down from the mule, his hands steady and respectful. Her legs were stiff from the long ride and she stumbled slightly. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her once again. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into the barn with both animals. She heard him moving efficiently, removing saddles and providing feed. The familiar sounds of evening chores were oddly comforting in their normalcy. When he returned, he carried her valise in one hand and led her to the cabin's door. Inside, a single lamp burned on a table, and a banked fire glowed in the stone fireplace. The cabin was simple, but meticulously clean. A few books stood on a rough-hewn shelf and dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. Andrew moved to the fireplace, adding logs with practiced movements. Soon, flames crackled cheerfully, pushing back the mountain chill. He retrieved a colorful quilt from a chest and laid it carefully on the wooden settee near the fire. "You'll be safe here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'll sleep in the barn." The events of the day crashed over Sophia like a wave. Exhaustion made her sway on her feet, and she sank onto the settee gratefully. The quilt was soft beneath her fingers, pieced together in a pattern of stars and squares. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. But Andrew had already stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind him. The fire's warmth wrapped around her like a blanket, and the steady crackle of burning wood filled the silence. Sophia's eyes grew heavy as she watched the flames dance. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this mountain cabin, under the protection of a scarred giant with gentle hands. The homestead settled into night sounds. The distant hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind in the pines, and the steady breathing of a woman who had found unexpected sanctuary in her darkest hour. Golden morning light spilled through the cabin's small windows, painting warm stripes across the rough-hewn log walls. Sophia stirred on the settee, the colorful quilt still wrapped snugly around her shoulders. For a moment, she blinked in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, the memories of yesterday crashed back. The train platform, the cruel laughter, and the mountain man who had come to her rescue. The aroma of wood smoke mingled with the rich scent of coffee and the salty promise of bacon. She sat up slowly, smoothing her rumpled traveling dress as best she could. To her surprise, Andrew McGraw was already at work at the cast-iron cookstove, his broad back turned to her as he tended to breakfast. He must have heard her movement, for he turned slightly, acknowledging her with a quiet nod. "Morning, ma'am. Hope you slept well enough." "Yes, thank you," Sophia replied softly, fighting the urge to pat her surely disheveled hair. She stood carefully, her muscles protesting from yesterday's long ride. Andrew gestured to the crude pine table with one large hand. "Please have a seat. Coffee's hot." The table had been scrubbed clean, and 2 mismatched plates were already set out. Sophia lowered herself onto one of the wooden chairs, watching as Andrew expertly flipped thick slices of bacon in the heavy skillet. His movements were surprisingly graceful for such a large man, efficient and precise. He brought the coffee first, pouring the steaming liquid into a blue enamel cup before her. The familiar scent brought unexpected tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. It reminded her too sharply of mornings in Boston, before everything had fallen apart. Andrew served the bacon onto their plates, adding thick slices of bread he must have baked himself. He sat across from her, the chair creaking slightly under his weight. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the clink of forks against plates and the gentle pop of the cookstove's dying fire. Sophia ate carefully, though her stomach growled at the simple but satisfying food. She couldn't help stealing glances at her host. In the morning light, his scars were more visible, a long mark down his left cheek, and smaller ones across his hands. But there was nothing frightening about him now, just a careful gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing size. After breakfast, Andrew stood abruptly. "Need to chop wood," he said, reaching for his coat. "Make yourself at home. There's more coffee if you'd like." Sophia watched through the window as he strode to the woodpile, his axe glinting in the morning sun. The steady thunk of metal striking wood soon filled the air, creating a rhythm that was somehow comforting in its regularity. She took the opportunity to unpack her single valise, laying out her few possessions with care. 3 dresses, carefully folded. A worn Bible that had belonged to her mother. A packet of letters tied with faded ribbon. A small sewing kit. When everything was arranged, it looked painfully meager, all that remained of her former life. The morning passed quietly. Sophia straightened the quilt on the settee and washed the breakfast dishes, finding comfort in these simple tasks. Around midday, she heard Andrew return inside, his heavy boots scraping on the threshold. He settled at the table with what looked like a letter, his large frame hunched over the paper as he read. His brow furrowed deeply, and she heard him mutter something about land office under his breath. The concern in his expression was clear even from across the room. Sophia hesitated, not wanting to pry into his business. But something about his troubled face made her speak up. "Is everything all right, Mr. McGraw?" He looked up, seeming almost surprised to find her there. For a long moment he said nothing, studying the letter in his hands. Then he sighed heavily. "Railroad's making trouble," he said finally, his voice rough. "Been trying to push through this valley for months now." Sophia moved closer to the table, drawn by the worry in his tone. "The railroad? But this is your land, isn't it?" Andrew's jaw tightened. "Been working this claim for 5 years. Built everything here with my own hands." He tapped the letter with one scarred finger. "But according to this notice from the land office, they're saying my claim ain't valid without proof of a settled household. Without a wife and proper family living here, they can seize the whole valley for their tracks." The implications of his words struck Sophia like a physical blow. She sank into the chair across from him, her mind whirling. Her presence here, a woman alone with nowhere else to go, could be the very thing that might save his land. The irony of it made her throat tight. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long do you have to prove your claim?" 30 days, he replied, his voice heavy with resignation. Not much time to find a solution. They sat in silence as the afternoon light began to fade. Andrew eventually rose to prepare their evening meal, moving about the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency she'd observed that morning. Soon, the cabin filled with the rich aroma of venison stew, making Sophia's stomach rumble despite her troubled thoughts. They ate by lamplight, the stew thick with vegetables from Andrew's garden. He broke the silence first, his voice carefully neutral. "Been thinking," he said, stirring his stew with concentration. "Maybe you might consider staying on a while longer, at least until we can figure something out." He glanced up at her briefly. "Cabin's small, but it's warm, and you'd be safe here." Sophia's hand tightened on her spoon. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. Here was a chance for shelter, for purpose. But she'd learned the hard way about promises made too quickly, about trust given too easily. The memory of that train platform, of standing alone with her single valise, was still too fresh. And yet, there was something about Andrew McGraw that made her want to believe. Perhaps it was the quiet way he defended her, or the careful distance he kept even now. His strength was obvious in every movement, but it was a gentle strength, one that seemed to promise protection rather than threat. She looked up to find him watching her, his storm-gray eyes patient, waiting for her answer. The lamplight caught the scar on his cheek, but somehow it no longer seemed fearsome. Instead, it spoke of a man who had faced his own battles, who understood what it meant to carry visible wounds. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. For now, that would have to be enough. Andrew nodded, accepting her answer without pressure. They finished their meal in companionable silence, while outside, the mountain night settled around the cabin like a protective blanket, full of possibilities neither of them was quite ready to name. The morning sun had barely crested the mountain peaks when Andrew began saddling his horse. His movements were purposeful, each buckle and strap checked with careful precision. Sophia watched from the cabin doorway, her shawl pulled tight against the crisp mountain air. "I'm coming with you," she announced, her voice firm despite her racing heart. Andrew paused, his large hands stilling on the leather straps. "It'll be a long ride, ma'am." "Rough trail." "I won't hide up here while decisions are being made about both our futures," Sophia replied, lifting her chin. "I've already ridden it once, remember?" A ghost of a smile crossed Andrew's scarred face. Without argument, he began preparing the mule for her. Sophia hurried inside to gather her shawl and a small bundle of provisions she'd packed earlier. The morning dew still clung to the grass as they set out, following a narrow trail that wound down the mountainside. The path twisted through stands of aspen trees, their leaves shimmering gold in the early light. Sophia's mule picked its way carefully behind Andrew's horse, hooves crunching on loose stones. As they descended, Andrew began to speak, his deep voice mixing with the sound of creaking leather and steady hoofbeats. "This valley," he said, gesturing to the expanse below them. "It was my father's dream. Came out here when I was just a boy, said he'd found the prettiest piece of God's country he'd ever laid eyes on." Sophia watched his broad shoulders as he spoke, noting how they tensed slightly at the mention of his father. "How long has the railroad been causing trouble?" she asked gently. "Started about 6 months back," Andrew replied, ducking under a low-hanging branch. "First, they tried buying folks out. When that didn't work, they started finding other ways. Legal papers, property line disputes, water rights." His voice grew harder. "Good families forced to pack up and leave, watching everything they built turn to dust." The trail opened onto a wider path, allowing Sophia to ride alongside him. She studied his profile, seeing the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. "You've put so much work into your land," she observed softly. Andrew nodded, his jaw tight. Every fence post, every field cleared, done with these two hands. My father's buried up there under the big pine tree. Can't let them take it. Won't let them take it. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Sophia found herself watching the valley below with new eyes, seeing not just the beauty of the landscape, but the stories written in every carefully tended field and mended fence line. By early afternoon, they reached Dutch Creek. The town looked different in daylight, less threatening than it had that first evening, but no more welcoming. Several people stopped to stare as they rode past, but Andrew's presence beside her kept the whispers at bay. The land office occupied a narrow building next to the general store, its windows dusty and uninviting. Andrew helped Sophia dismount, then tied both animals to the hitching post. His hand lingered briefly on her elbow, steadying her, a gesture that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Inside, the office was dim and cluttered with stacks of papers and land surveys. A thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles barely looked up from his desk as they entered. "McGraw," he said, his voice as dry as the paper surrounding him. "Expected you'd be showing up soon." "Mr. Peters," Andrew acknowledged, removing his hat. "Got your notice about my claim." The land agent finally looked up, his gaze sliding dismissively over Sophia before returning to Andrew. "The railroad's petition is quite clear, McGraw. Without proof of a proper household, a legal marriage record, and evidence of permanent settlement, your claim doesn't meet the requirements for protected status." Sophia saw Andrew's hands clench into fists at his sides, but his voice remained steady. "Been working that land for 5 years. Got the original deed with my father's name on it." "Which would matter if you had a family residing there," Peters replied coldly. "But a single man's claim won't stand against the railroad's interests. They're offering fair compensation." "Ain't about compensation," Andrew cut in, his voice low but intense. "That land's not for sale, at any price." The agent sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them with a cloth. "Then I suggest you find yourself a wife, McGraw. You have 29 days until the railroad's petition becomes final." He replaced his glasses and picked up his pen, clearly dismissing them. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright after the office's gloom. Sophia blinked, watching Andrew check the saddle straps with more force than necessary. His face was dark with suppressed anger, but his movements remained controlled. "He was awful," she said quietly, laying a hand on his arm. "So cold about something that means so much." Andrew's muscles relaxed slightly under her touch. "To him, it's just papers and profits. To me?" He trailed off, looking toward the mountains that held his home. "To you, it's everything," Sophia finished softly. He turned to look at her then, something unreadable in his storm-gray eyes. After a moment, he simply nodded and helped her mount her mule. They began the long ride home as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks. The moon was already visible, a pale ghost in the afternoon sky. Neither spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts as their shadows lengthened across the trail. Evening was settling in by the time they reached the cabin, the rising moon casting silver light across the valley. Andrew took care of the animals while Sophia built up the fire and put on coffee to brew. Later, as they sat in the firelight's warm glow, Sophia noticed Andrew attempting to thread a needle, his large fingers struggling with the tiny eye. Several of his shirts lay nearby, sporting torn seams and missing buttons. "Let me help with those," she offered, reaching for the needle. "I'm quite good with mending." Andrew hesitated before handing over the sewing supplies. "Much obliged," he said quietly, watching as she efficiently threaded the needle and chose a shirt to begin with. The familiar motion of needle and thread was soothing. Sophia worked steadily, aware of Andrew's presence in his chair by the fire. The comfortable silence between them was broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the soft sound of thread pulling through fabric. When she finally looked up from her mending, she found Andrew had dozed off in his chair, his face relaxed in sleep. The firelight softened his scars, and something in her chest tightened at how vulnerable he looked in that moment. Later, Lying in her makeshift bed on the settee, Sophia stared at the moonlight patterns on the ceiling. She thought about the land agent's cold dismissal, about Andrew's quiet determination to protect his home, about how strange it was that her own misfortune had led her here, to this very valley, at this very time. In the loft above, Andrew too lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the mountain and thinking about the woman below who had shown such unexpected strength and grace. Neither spoke, but both felt the weight of an unspoken possibility growing between them, as tangible as the moonlight streaming through the cabin's windows. The days began to settle into a gentle rhythm at the mountain cabin. Each morning, Sophia rose with the sun, kindling the cook fire and setting coffee to boil. The familiar tasks of sweeping floors and hanging linens gave structure to her hours, while Andrew's steady presence outside, chopping wood, mending fences, checking trap lines, provided a strange sort of comfort. Through the cabin's small window, she would catch glimpses of him working, his broad shoulders bent to whatever task needed doing. Sometimes he'd pause, looking out across the valley with an expression that spoke of deep connection to the land. In those unguarded moments, Sophia saw past his gruff exterior to the caring heart beneath. The evenings brought them together over simple suppers, venison stew, cornbread, whatever Sophia could fashion from their limited stores. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a companionable quiet, broken occasionally by practical discussions about the next day's work or comments about the changing weather. One such evening, as Sophia cleared away the tin plates, Andrew remained at the table, his fingers drumming an uncertain rhythm on the rough wood. She could sense something weighing on his mind. "Miss Sophia," he finally said, his deep voice careful, "been thinking. On our situation." She stilled, a dishcloth frozen in her hands. "Yes?" "That land agent gave us 29 days. Time's running short." He cleared his throat. "Reckon there might be a way to satisfy the law. Keep the railroad at bay." Sophia's heart began to pound, though she kept her voice steady. "What way would that be, Mr. McGraw?" "Marriage," he said simply. "In name only, mind you. Just papers and promises to keep the law happy." His eyes met hers, earnest and direct. "Wouldn't expect nothing more than partnership. You'd have protection, a roof over your head. I'd keep my land." The word marriage hit her like a physical blow. Memories of that other betrayal. The groom who had married another while she traveled west to meet him threatened to overwhelm her. Her hands trembled as she set down the dishcloth. Andrew must have seen her distress, for he stood slowly, keeping his distance. "Ain't trying to take advantage," he said softly. "Just offering a solution that might help us both." Sophia forced herself to breathe deeply, to think past the hurt. This was different, she told herself. Andrew had shown nothing but respect since that first night at the station. He offered protection without demands, partnership without pretense. She started, then steadied herself. "I would need time to consider." "Of course," he nodded. "But not too much time. Railroad won't wait forever." That night, Sophia lay awake on her settee, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the cabin walls. She thought of Andrew's proposal, practical, honest, without false romance. Perhaps that was better than pretty words that turned to lies. At least she knew where she stood with him. Morning found them both subdued, moving through their tasks with careful awareness of each other. As Sophia kneaded bread dough, she watched Andrew through the window, splitting logs with powerful strokes. His dedication to this land was real as her need for security and purpose. When he came in for the midday meal, she had made her decision. "Yes," she said simply, meeting his surprised look. "I'll marry you, Mr. McGraw, to protect the land." Relief softened his weathered features. "Much obliged, Miss Sophia. We can ride to town tomorrow, see the preacher." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Sophia wore her best dress, the same one she'd arrived in, now carefully pressed. Andrew had shaved and donned a clean shirt, though his collar remained stubbornly crooked, until she reached up to straighten it. The ride to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Dutch Creek looked different now, less threatening than that first terrible night. Still, Sophia felt the weight of curious stares as they made their way to the small clapboard church. The circuit preacher was there, as if expecting them. His kind eyes took in their formal clothes and serious expressions without comment. Inside the church, morning light filtered through simple glass windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. "Join hands," the preacher instructed, opening his worn Bible. Andrew's large hand engulfed Sophia's smaller one, warm and steady. She focused on that warmth as the preacher began the ceremony, his voice filling the empty church with familiar words that now held new meaning. When it came time for the vows, Sophia's voice quavered slightly. "I, Sophia Whitfield, take thee, Andrew McGraw." The words caught in her throat, heavy with memory and hope and fear. But Andrew's hand remained firm over hers, his deep voice unwavering as he spoke his own vows. The simple gold ring, purchased that morning from the mercantile, slid onto her finger, cool and strange. "Let us pray," the preacher said, bowing his head. "Lord, bless this union. Grant these two souls the wisdom to build something lasting from this beginning, whatever form it may take. Guide them in partnership, protect them in trial, and lead them to understanding of your purpose in bringing them together. Amen." The ride home felt different, though nothing had really changed. Sophia was aware of the ring on her finger, of Andrew's solid presence beside her, of the curious mix of gratitude and uncertainty in her heart. At the cabin, Andrew helped her down from her mule, then disappeared around back where the woodpile waited. The rhythmic thunk of his axe continued well into the evening, as if he was working out some inner turmoil through physical labor. Sophia moved through the cabin, their cabin now, she supposed, straightening things that didn't need straightening. The space felt both familiar and strange, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts and unnamed emotions. In the gathering dusk, she lit the lamps and prepared a simple supper. When Andrew finally came in, his shirt dark with sweat despite the cool evening, they ate in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before, charged with awareness of their changed circumstances. Later, as Sophia prepared for bed on her settee, Andrew had insisted she keep the main sleeping space while he remained in the loft. She caught him watching her with an unreadable expression. Something shifted in his storm-gray eyes before he turned away, climbing the ladder to his own bed. The cabin settled around them, creaking softly in the night wind. Though nothing had physically changed, everything felt different. This was no longer just shelter, but the beginning of a household, however fragile. Their practical arrangement had become something more complicated, wrapped in paper, promises and golden rings and prayers for guidance. Sophia lay in the darkness, listening to Andrew's quiet movements. Above, she was grateful for the safety he offered, for his honest approach to their arrangement. Yet doubt whispered at the edges of her mind, reminding her of past betrayals and broken promises. In the loft, Andrew too lay awake, wrestling with feelings he had sworn never to entertain again after his brother's death. He had told himself this marriage was purely practical, a way to save his land and offer protection to a woman in need. But something about Sophia's quiet strength and gentle presence had begun to work past his carefully constructed defenses. The cabin held them both, separate yet connected, each privately considering the strange turns of providence that had brought them to this point. Outside, an owl called into the night, its lonely voice echoing across the valley that had drawn them together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley as Sophia knelt by the stream, scrubbing Andrew's work shirts against the washboard. A week had passed since their wedding, settling into an uneasy routine. The water ran cool over her hands, carrying away soap suds as she worked. Behind her, fresh-washed linens fluttered on the line like pale flags in the mountain breeze. Up in the high country, Andrew McGraw worked his trap line, checking the steel jaws he'd set for beaver and marten. The autumn air grew sharper as daylight faded, warning of winter's approach. He'd nearly finished his circuit when he heard it, a rustle in the undergrowth, too small for a deer, too deliberate for a rabbit. Andrew froze, his experienced eyes scanning the brush. There. A flash of movement. Not an animal at all, but a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with copper skin and tangled black hair. His clothes hung in tatters, and his thin arms wrapped around his middle, as if to hold himself together. "Easy now," Andrew said softly, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Ain't gonna hurt you." The boy's dark eyes darted like a trapped animal's, seeking escape. When he tried to bolt, Andrew's long arm shot out, catching him before he could flee. The child struggled briefly, then went still, trembling. "Lord above," Andrew muttered, taking in the boy's condition. His ribs showed clearly through his torn shirt, and old bruises marked his arms. Apache features marked his heritage, but there was something familiar in the set of his jaw, something that spoke of white ancestry too. "Reckon you're coming home with me," Andrew said firmly. He scooped up the boy who weighed no more than a sack of flour. "Got someone there who'll feed you proper." The sun had nearly set by the time Andrew carried his unexpected burden down the trail to the cabin. Sophia looked up from hanging the last of the washing, her eyes widening at the sight. "Andrew?" Who, before she could finish, the boy, twisted free of Andrew's grip and darted toward the trees, but hunger and exhaustion had taken their toll. He stumbled, falling to his knees in the dusty yard. Sophia moved slowly, the way she might approach a spooked horse. "It's all right," she soothed, kneeling a few feet away. "No one here will harm you." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a chunk of fresh cornbread, still warm from supper. "Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes fixed on the food, though he didn't move. Sophia set the cornbread on the ground between them and waited. After a long moment, thin fingers darted out to snatch it. He devoured it in desperate bites, watching them warily all the while. "Found him up by the ridge," Andrew explained quietly. "Been living wild from the look of him." Sophia's heart ached at the sight of the child's bare feet, scratched and dirty. "Does he have a name?" "Samuel," the boy whispered, so softly they almost missed it. "Mama called me Samuel." Andrew's face darkened. "I remember now. His mother. She came to town last winter seeking help. Townsfolk turned her away. Said she wasn't." He glanced at the boy, lowering his voice. "Wasn't one of them. Found out later she died in an abandoned barn. Consumption, they said. Never knew what became of her boy." Sophia's hands clenched in her apron. "He's staying," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "We can't send him back out there." Andrew shook his head. "We've barely enough for ourselves, woman. Winter's coming on. Please, Pa." Samuel's voice quavered. Hope and fear mingled in those two simple words. Andrew's breath caught. He stared at the boy, something raw and painful crossing his weathered features. Sophia saw the moment his resistance crumbled, carved away by that plaintive request. "Well," he said gruffly, "reckon we could use an extra pair of hands around here. Once you're stronger, that is." Relief flooded Samuel's face, though he tried to hide it. Sophia stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "First things need is a proper wash and some clean clothes. Andrew, fetch that wash tub from the barn, and there's stew keeping warm on the stove." Inside the cabin, while Andrew hauled water to heat, Sophia found one of his old shirts. "It'll swim on you," she told Samuel, "but it's clean. We'll ride to town tomorrow, get you proper things to wear." The boy's eyes widened in alarm. "Town's not safe," he whispered. "They don't want me there." "You let us worry about that," Andrew said firmly, setting the filled tub near the fire. "Ain't nobody going to run you off while you're with us." After Samuel was scrubbed clean and dressed in Andrew's oversized shirt, they sat down to supper. The boy ate 3 bowls of venison stew, sopping up every drop with cornbread. His movements were quick and furtive, as if expecting the food to be snatched away. Sophia shared a look with Andrew over the boy's dark head. They'd need to move carefully, she realized. Trust would come slowly to a child who'd learned the world's cruelty so young. When the dishes were cleared, Samuel's eyes grew heavy. He fought sleep, but exhaustion won out. He curled up by the hearth like a wild creature seeking warmth, still watchful even in his drowsiness. Sophia fetched her warmest quilt and tucked it around him. Her hand hesitated, then gently smoothed his tangled hair. The boy tensed at first, then relaxed under her touch, his breathing evening out into sleep. Andrew sat in his chair by the fire, watching them. The flames cast shifting shadows across his scarred face as he stared into their depths, lost in thought. Sophia knew that look, had seen it when he wrestled with difficult decisions. "He needs us," she said softly, not wanting to wake Samuel. Andrew nodded slowly. "Reckon we might need him too." His voice roughened. "Been too long alone up here. Cabin feels different with him in it. More like he trailed off, but Sophia understood. More like a home." The fire crackled in the silence, its warm light embracing the sleeping child, the worried woman, and the thoughtful man. Outside, an owl called, reminding them that the wild was never far away. But inside the cabin's walls, something new had taken root. Fragile as a spring seedling, but growing stronger with each passing moment. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in streaks of pink and gold as Samuel darted across the yard, arms outstretched, chasing the McGraw's scattered chickens. His bare feet kicked up puffs of dust and his delighted giggles filled the crisp morning air. Sophia stood at the cabin door, a dish towel in her hands, watching the boy's antics. When a particularly determined hen dodged Samuel's grasp, sending him tumbling head over heels, a laugh burst from her throat, bright and unexpected as mountain spring water. Andrew looked up from splitting logs, the sound catching him off guard. Something warm unfurled in his chest at the sight of her smile, genuine and unguarded for the first time since she'd stepped off that train. He found himself watching her longer than he meant to, the axe forgotten in his hands. "Samuel," Sophia called, still smiling. "Leave those poor birds be and come help with the morning chores." The boy trotted over, cheeks flushed with exercise. His initial wariness had begun to fade, replaced by an eagerness to belong. "What can I do?" "Well now," Andrew said, setting his axe aside. "Reckon it's time you learned the proper way of things around here." He gestured to the empty water bucket by the door. "First task is fetching fresh water from the stream." Samuel's face lit up at being given real work. Together, they showed him how to carry the bucket. Without spilling, though the first few trips left his clothes damp, he persevered, determined to master this new skill. "Good job," Andrew praised, when Samuel managed a full bucket without a drop lost. The boy's answering smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. They moved on to the woodpile next. Andrew demonstrated how to stack the split logs properly, explaining, "Gotta let the air flow between them, see? Keeps the wood dry for winter." Samuel's small hands arranged each piece carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration. When one stack toppled, he quickly rebuilt it, more determined than ever. Sophia brought out Andrew's old curry brush and showed Samuel how to groom the mule. The gentle beast stood patient under the boy's inexpert strokes, seeming to understand the importance of the moment. "She likes you," Sophia observed, as the mule nudged Samuel's shoulder affectionately. The boy's pleased expression spoke volumes about his growing sense of place in their household. While Samuel practiced his new chores, Andrew retreated to the shade of the porch. He pulled out his pocket knife and a piece of cedar wood, carefully beginning to shape it. His scarred hands moved with surprising delicacy as he carved. Sophia joined him later, showing Samuel how to fold the dried laundry. She demonstrated the proper way, to match corners on sheets and smooth wrinkles from shirts. The boy mimicked her movements exactly, his face serious with concentration. When Andrew finished his carving, a small whistle decorated with simple designs, Samuel's eyes grew wide with wonder. The sound it made was sweet and clear like a thrush's morning song. "For me?" he whispered, holding it as if it were made of gold. Andrew nodded, gruff with emotion. "Every boy needs something of his own." Sunday morning found them preparing for church. Sophia helped Samuel into his new clothes, simple but clean garments bought in town. She wet her handkerchief to smooth his unruly hair, while Andrew hitched the wagon. The boy fidgeted nervously as they approached town, his fingers worrying the whistle in his pocket. "Do I have to go inside?" "We go together," Sophia said firmly, reaching back to squeeze his hand. "That's what families do." The wagon's wheels creaked to a stop outside the whitewashed church. Heads turned as Andrew helped Sophia down, then lifted Samuel. Whispers rustled through the gathering crowd like wind through dry grass. They made quite a sight. The scarred mountain man, the mail-order bride who wasn't, and the half-Apache boy between them. Sophia held her head high, though her hand trembled slightly on Andrew's arm. Samuel pressed close to her skirts, trying to make himself invisible. Inside, they took a pew near the back. The morning sun streamed through simple glass windows, catching dust, motes in bars of light. Samuel stared in wonder at the crude cross on the wall, while Andrew's shoulders gradually relaxed as the familiar hymns washed over them. The circuit preacher stood to deliver his sermon, his weathered face grave. His text was from Matthew. "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." His keen eyes swept the congregation, lingering meaningfully on their small family. As he spoke of Christ's love for the outcast and forgotten, several townspeople shifted uncomfortably in their seats. After the service, while Sophia helped Samuel explore the church's small garden, the preacher drew Andrew aside. His manner was hesitant, burdened with long-carried weight. "There's something you should know, McGraw," he said quietly. "About your brother." Andrew's spine stiffened. "James? What about him?" "I married him just before he died." The preacher's voice was heavy with old grief. "It was secret. Had to be. He'd uncovered evidence of the railroad's corrupt dealings, needed to protect his wife if anything happened." The words hit Andrew like physical blows. "You knew? All this time?" The preacher nodded slowly. "The railroad men caught him before he could expose them. I've carried the guilt of my silence ever since." Andrew's hands clenched into fists, years of self-blame warring with fresh anger at the railroad's treachery. The truth of his brother's death, not an accident as reported, but murder, burned in his chest like coal. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Samuel dozed against Sophia's shoulder, worn out from the excitement of the day. The setting sun painted long shadows across the trail as they climbed back into the hills. That evening, after Samuel was tucked into his bed in the corner, Andrew told Sophia everything. She listened without interrupting as he spoke of his brother's death, his own years of guilty survival, and the preacher's revelation. When he finished, silence filled the cabin, but for the pop and crackle of the fire. Samuel had crept from his bed during the telling and now lay sleeping in Andrew's lap, his small hand curled trustingly around Andrew's thumb. Sophia's voice was gentle when she finally spoke. "Faith isn't just about believing, Andrew. It's about forgiveness, too. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Andrew looked down at the sleeping child in his lap, this boy who'd already learned to trust again despite the world's cruelty. His hand smoothed Samuel's dark hair, and something in his heart began to shift, like ice breaking up in spring. "Reckon you might be right," he said softly, and for the first time in years, the weight of his brother's death felt a little lighter. Sophia smiled and laid another log on the fire. The flames leaped up, warm light spilling across their small family circle. Outside, a whippoorwill called in the gathering dusk, its song as sweet and clear as Samuel's cedar whistle. Golden leaves drifted down from the aspens as Andrew and Sophia worked to prepare their homestead for the coming winter. The morning air held a sharp bite now, warning of the harsh months ahead. Steam rose from their breath as they moved about their tasks with quiet purpose. Andrew had shot 2 large bucks the week before, and now the cleaned meat hung in strips on drying racks behind the cabin, Sophia tended the precious food carefully, shooing away curious birds and turning each piece to ensure even drying. The rich smell of smoking venison filled the valley. "More salt, Ma?" Samuel asked, holding up the wooden bowl. His small hands were already capable with the curing process, having learned quickly under Sophia's patient teaching. "That's right," she nodded, showing him how to sprinkle it evenly. "This'll keep us fed through the cold months." In the root cellar Andrew had dug beneath the cabin, potatoes from their small garden lay carefully sorted in wooden crates. Samuel had helped with the harvest, his excited shouts marking each discovery as he dug through the soil. Now those same potatoes would see them through until spring. "We'll need more wood," Andrew announced one morning, his keen eyes measuring the growing woodpile against his experience of mountain winters. "Double what we have now, at least." They worked as a family to stack the split logs. Samuel insisted on helping despite the weight, determined to do his share. He could manage only one piece at a time, but his dedication brought a smile to Andrew's weathered face. "Careful there, son," Andrew cautioned as Samuel wobbled under a particularly large chunk. The word "son" slipped out naturally now, warming them both. Sophia watched from the doorway, her hands dusted with flour from bread making. The sight of her two men working together filled her heart near to bursting. She had never imagined finding such contentment after the humiliation at the train station. Yet here she was, kneading life into daily bread for her own family. The cabin itself had transformed under her care. Curtains made from feed sacks softened the windows and dried herbs hung in neat bundles from the rafters. Samuel's small bed in the corner bore a colorful quilt she'd pieced together from scraps. Even Andrew's old shirts showed evidence of her mending skills, neat stitches replacing the worn places. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in deep oranges and purples, Andrew returned from checking his trap lines with an old wooden chest under his arm. Sophia looked up from stirring the stew pot, curious at his unusual burden. "Got something for you?" he said gruffly, setting. The chest on the table. Samuel abandoned his whittling by the fire to watch, eyes bright with interest. Andrew opened the lid with careful hands, revealing something wrapped in clean muslin. "Was my mother's," he explained, lifting out a shawl woven in subtle earth tones. "She made it herself before she passed. Reckon she'd want you to have it now." Sophia's hands trembled as she touched the soft wool. The weaving was exquisite, complex patterns speaking of hours of patient work. "Andrew, I can't take something so precious." "Please," he said quietly. "You're family now. It belongs to you." Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes as she draped the shawl around her shoulders. The weight of it felt like an embrace, carrying years of love and belonging woven into every thread. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought." She paused, gathering courage. "That day at the station, when everyone was laughing and my world had fallen apart, I truly believed God had abandoned me, that I was unwanted, cast aside like something worthless." Andrew's large hands stilled on the chest lid. "What changed your mind?" "You did," she said simply. "When you took my hand that night, it was like God reaching down through you to lift me up, to show me I wasn't alone after all." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Samuel had crept closer, sensing the importance of the moment. Finally, Andrew spoke, his deep voice unusually hesitant. "Reckon I know something about feeling unwanted." His scarred fingers traced patterns on the wooden chest. "After the bear attack, folks couldn't seem to look at me proper. Children would hide. Women would cross the street. Started believing I was too marked up for anyone to see past it. Too big, too rough for genuine caring." Sophia reached across the table to cover his hand with hers. "The size of your heart matters more than the size of your hands, Andrew McGraw. And these scars? They're proof you survived, that you're strong enough to protect what you love." Samuel pressed against Andrew's side, small fingers finding the largest scar on his forearm. "Pa's brave," he declared with absolute certainty. "Like the warriors in the stories my mother told." Andrew's arm curled around the boy, drawing him close. Sophia moved to join them, the shawl trailing soft wool across rough floorboards. Together, they knelt by the hearth. "Lord," Sophia prayed softly, "thank you for bringing us together, for showing us that your plans are bigger than our fears. Help us build something true here, something lasting." "Amen," Andrew murmured, and Samuel echoed it sleepily. The boy's eyes were growing heavy, his small body relaxing against Andrew's chest. The fire painted warm light across his peaceful face as he drifted toward sleep, secure in. The knowledge of his place in their family, Sophia leaned her head against Andrew's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. The shawl wrapped them all in its gentle warmth, like a blessing passed down through generations. Outside, the wind whispered through golden aspen leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf called to its mate. For the first time since stepping off that train, Sophia felt completely, utterly at home. The cabin, the valley that offered these people, they were no longer just shelter from rejection or a means of survival. They were where she belonged, where God had meant her to be all along. Andrew's arm tightened slightly around her, and she knew he felt it too. This was more than a marriage of convenience now, more than a way to save his land. It was becoming something real and precious, built on trust and understanding and shared faith. Samuel's quiet breathing mingled with the crackle of the fire, a peaceful counterpoint to the autumn wind outside. Tomorrow would bring more work, more preparations for winter, more challenges to face. But tonight, in the warm circle of firelight, they were complete. The storm arrived without warning, sweeping down from the peaks with a howling fury that rattled the cabin's shutters. Fat snowflakes swirled past the windows, growing thicker by the minute until the entire valley disappeared behind a white veil. Andrew had barely finished securing the livestock in the barn when the full force hit. "Reckon we're in for a long one," he said, stamping snow from his boots by the door. His beard was crusted with ice, and his breath came out in great white clouds. Sophia hurried to stoke the fire higher, while Samuel pressed his nose against the window pane, watching the world vanish beneath the swirling white. The wind moaned through the eaves, but inside the cabin glowed warm and golden in the lamplight. "Will the animals be all right, Pa?" Samuel asked, worry creasing his young brow. Andrew's heart squeezed at the boy's concern for their stock. "They're snug in the barn, son. Extra hay and fresh water. They'll weather it fine." Through that first night, the storm raged like a wild thing. Sophia lay awake listening to the wind's voice change from whistle to wail, and back again. The solid presence of Andrew in his bed across the room, and Samuel's soft breathing from his corner gave her comfort. Their little family, safe together while nature unleashed its fury outside. By morning, the snow showed no signs of letting up. Drifts had climbed halfway up the windows, transforming the glass into ghostly squares of white. Andrew dug a path to check on the animals, returning with fresh milk from their cow, and a report that all was well in the barn. With no chance of outdoor work, they settled into the forced closeness. Sophia brought out her treasured Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. Samuel sat cross-legged at her feet as she began to read, her clear voice carrying over the storm's constant background roar. "The Lord is my shepherd shadi." "Yet I want to keep that, but he maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Andrew had settled at the table with his leatherworking tools, mending harnesses that had grown weak over the summer's use. His big hands worked surely with the awl and waxed thread, but Sophia noticed his eyes lifting to watch them more and more often. There was something in his gaze that made her heart flutter, a quiet gratitude that went deeper than words. Through the second day, the storm continued unabated. Samuel helped Sophia bake bread, his small hands covered in flour as he learned to knead the dough. The familiar smells of yeast and wood smoke filled the cabin, making it feel even more like home. Andrew whittled by the fire, cedar shavings curling at his feet as a small horse took shape under his knife. That evening, Sophia read from the Book of Ruth, the story of loyalty and chosen family striking close to her heart. "Whither thou goest, I will go," she read softly. "And where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people." She felt Andrew's eyes on her, but didn't dare look up, afraid of what her own face might reveal. Instead, she focused on Samuel, who had dozed off against her knee, his dark lashes casting shadows on his cheeks in the lamplight. The third morning dawned in absolute silence. The wind had died during the night, leaving the world muffled in white. Sunlight streamed through the windows, throwing rainbow sparkles where it caught ice crystals in the air. "Storms broke," Andrew announced after checking outside. "Must be 3 feet of fresh snow out there, maybe more in the drifts." Samuel bounced with excitement, eager to explore this transformed world. After breakfast, Andrew announced it was time to check the trap lines. The boy's eyes lit up when Andrew added, "Reckon you're old enough to help if you'd like." "Really?" Samuel breathed, already scrambling for his coat. Sophia helped bundle him in warm layers, wrapping Andrew's old scarf twice around his small frame. "Mind what your pa tells you," she cautioned, the word falling naturally from her lips. "Stay close to him out there." Samuel nodded solemnly, then surprised her with a quick hug before running to Andrew's side. The big man helped him strap on snowshoes, showing him how to walk without tangling his feet. Sophia watched from the doorway as they set off together, Andrew's massive tracks and Samuel's smaller ones marking their path through the pristine snow. Her heart seemed to expand watching them, the gentle giant and the small boy who had somehow become their son. While they were gone, she kept busy tending the fire and preparing supper. A pot of bean soup simmered on the stove, filling the cabin with savory steam. She hummed as she worked, an old hymn her mother used to sing, feeling more content than she had in years. The sun was setting when Andrew and Samuel returned, their cheeks red with cold and excitement. Samuel bubbled over with tales of their adventure, how they had found 2 rabbits in the traps, how Andrew had shown him to reset them properly, how they had seen deer tracks in a fox's den. "And Pa showed me how to read the weather in the clouds," he announced proudly as they sat down to supper. "Says there's more snow coming next week." The word hung in the air between them. Pennsylvania. So simple, yet so profound. Andrew's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, his eyes suddenly bright with moisture. He set the spoon down carefully, one scarred hand rising to swipe roughly at his face. Sophia's own vision blurred as she watched the emotion work across Andrew's features. This massive man, who could face down angry townsfolk without flinching, was undone by a child's love. Her heart swelled with such tenderness she could barely breathe. Samuel, suddenly uncertain at the adult's reaction, looked between them anxiously. Is it all right to call you Pa?" Andrew cleared his throat roughly. "More than all right, son," he managed, voice husky. "More than all right." The rest of the meal passed in comfortable quiet, broken only by the snap of the fire and the clink of spoons against bowls. Later, after Samuel had been tucked into bed with a story and a prayer, Andrew and Sophia sat together by the hearth. The firelight played across his strong features, softening the scars that marked his face. "Thank you," he said finally, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" "For bringing light back into this place, into my life." His hands worked restlessly at a piece of kindling. "Was just existing before, not really living. You and the boy." He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. Sophia trembled, her heart racing at his nearness, at the weight of meaning in his voice. She had been fighting this feeling for weeks now, this growing awareness of him not just as protector and provider, but as a man. A good man, with a gentle heart behind his fierce exterior. She was falling in love with him, she realized with startling clarity. Not just grateful for his rescue, not just comfortable in their arrangement, but truly, deeply in love. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Andrew's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then fell back to his lap. Neither dared break the fragile moment with declarations or demands. It was enough, for now, to sit in the firelight and know that something precious was growing between them, as pure and clean as the new-fallen snow outside. The late winter morning dawned crisp and clear as Andrew loaded the wagon with pelts. Sophia wrapped Samuel in an extra wool scarf, tucking it snugly around his neck before they all climbed aboard. The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement. Trips to town were rare treats during the cold months. Frost glittered on bare tree branches as they wound down the mountain trail. Andrew sat tall on the wagon seat, his rifle across his knees, more from habit than expectation of trouble. Sophia noticed his jaw tightening as they approached Dutch Creek, but she said nothing, simply placed her hand over his for a moment. The town had grown busier since their last visit. Railroad surveyors in crisp coats strode between buildings, marking measurements in leather-bound notebooks. New faces filled the streets, rough-looking men with heavy pistols on their hips. Andrew's shoulders tensed as he guided the wagon toward Mason's general store. "I'll just be a minute," he told Sophia and Samuel. "Need to settle accounts with Mason for these pelts." He helped them down from the wagon, his touch lingering protectively on Samuel's shoulder before he gathered an armful of furs and headed inside. Sophia was examining dried apples through Mason's front window when she heard the commotion. Heavy boots thundered on the wooden sidewalk, and a harsh voice cut through the morning air. Well, if it ain't the squatter himself. The railroad foreman stood at the store's entrance, flanked by 2 deputies. His expensive coat and polished boots seemed to mock the town's dusty streets. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the tension crackling in the air. Inside the store, Andrew straightened slowly, setting down his pelts. His face remained impassive, but Sophia saw his hand drift toward his rifle. "This here's private property," the foreman continued, gesturing expansively. "Railroad property. You're trespassing, McGraw, same as you've been doing up in that valley." "That valley's been in my family 20 years, Andrew rumbled, his voice deceptively quiet. "Got the papers to prove it." The foreman's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Papers? You mean that joke of a marriage license?" He turned to the growing crowd. "Folks, this a fraudulent claim. Man picks up some mail order reject," he sneered at Sophia. "Thinks that makes him a proper settler." Samuel pressed against Sophia's skirts, trembling. She wrapped an arm around him, lifting her chin despite the burning in her cheeks. The crowd's whispers felt like stinging insects against her skin. "And that ain't even touching on the Indian brat," one deputy added, spitting into the dirt. "Civilized folk don't take in savages." Andrew's rifle came up in one fluid motion. "Take that back," he growled. The deputies' hands dropped to their pistols. The crowd scattered for cover, leaving Sophia and Samuel exposed on the sidewalk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to move, to step forward and lay her hand on Andrew's arm. "Andrew," she said softly. "Please." His muscles were rigid under her touch. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Andrew lowered the rifle. The defeat in his eyes cut Sophia deeper than any of the foreman's words. "Smart choice," the foreman smirked. He turned to the deputies. "Reckon we ought to do something about this situation. Maybe escort the missus back east where she belongs. And I hear them orphan trains are always looking for new passengers." Samuel's fingers dug into Sophia's skirt. She felt his silent tears soaking through the fabric. "You try it." Andrew's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of violence. "You try taking them from me." "That a threat, McGraw?" The foreman's hand settled on his own pistol. "Because I got the law right here backing me up. How many you think you can take before they gun you down? What happens to your family, then?" The words struck home. Andrew's shoulders sagged just slightly, but Sophia saw the change, saw 20 years of working the land, of building something from nothing, crumbling under the weight of progress and greed. "1 week," the foreman declared. 1 week to clear out or we'll do it for you." He turned on his heel, deputies following with matching sneers. The crowd began to disperse, some faces showing sympathy, others barely concealed satisfaction at seeing the mountain man brought low. Mason, the store owner, approached cautiously. "I'm sorry, Andrew. Times are changing. Railroads got more lawyers than we got sense out here." Andrew didn't respond. He gathered the pelts mechanically, not meeting anyone's eyes. The wagon ride home passed in heavy silence, broken only by Samuel's occasional sniffles. Sophia wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but Andrew's rigid posture warned against it. Evening settled over the cabin like a shroud. Samuel picked at his supper before asking to be excused early. Sophia tucked him in, whispering prayers and promises that everything would be all right, though her own heart trembled with uncertainty. When she returned to the main room, Andrew sat staring into the fire, his untouched plate beside him. The flames cast shadows across his face, deepening the lines of worry and rage etched there. "I failed you," he said finally, his voice rough. "Failed both of you. Should have known I couldn't." He trailed off, hands clenching into fists on his knees. "Couldn't what?" Sophia asked gently. "Protect us?" "You have, Andrew. Every day since that first evening at the station." He shook his head. "Can't fight the railroad. Can't fight the law. Everything I built, everything I thought I could give you and Samuel, it's all slipping away." Sophia felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back. Instead, she knelt by the hearth, clasping her hands in her lap. Her voice was steady as she began to pray aloud. "Lord, we need your strength now more than ever. This valley, this home, they're more than just land and logs. They're the future you led us to, the family you brought together." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Give us courage to face whatever comes. Show us the path through this darkness." Andrew remained silent, but she felt his attention shift from the fire to her words. She continued praying, pouring out her fears and hopes, her gratitude for their small family, her plea for guidance. When she finished, the cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Looking up, she found Andrew watching her, his expression raw with emotion. The faith that had sustained her through rejection and loneliness now offered itself to him, a lifeline in desperate times. She saw his struggle, the proud mountain man accepting that some battles couldn't be won by strength alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. Outside, snow began to fall, adding another layer to the white blanket that covered their threatened valley. Morning crept over the valley in shades of iron and slate. Heavy clouds hung low, pressing down on the snow-covered peaks like a wool blanket. The day seemed to match Andrew's mood as he attacked the woodpile behind the cabin, each swing of his axe carrying the weight of yesterday's humiliation. Inside, warmed by the crackling hearth, Sophia sat with Samuel at the rough-hewn table. She guided his finger across the worn pages of her Bible, helping him sound out the words. The boy's dark eyes were serious with concentration, though they darted occasionally to the window at the rhythmic thud of Andrew's axe. "That's right," Sophia encouraged, smoothing Samuel's hair. "The Lord is my shepherd. Now what does that mean to you?" Before Samuel could answer, a particularly violent crack split the air. Through the window, Sophia watched Andrew shoulder another log onto the chopping block, his movements sharp with barely contained fury. He had been at it since sunrise, working himself to exhaustion as if physical labor could drive away their troubles. The morning wore on. Samuel's lesson ended, and he curled up with a piece of string, practicing the knots Andrew had taught him. Sophia stood at the window, watching steam rise from Andrew's shoulders in the cold air. Each blow of the axe seemed to carry more despair than the last. When the sun reached its peak, hidden behind the thick clouds, Sophia wrapped her shawl tight and stepped outside. The snow crunched under her boots as she approached Andrew. He paused mid-swing, chest heaving, sweat freezing on his brow despite the chill. "You'll wear yourself out," she said softly. Andrew's laugh was bitter. "What difference does it make?" Can't fight the railroad with an axe. No, Sophia agreed. But giving up means letting them win. Letting them destroy not just your claim, but everything this valley means. Andrew drove the axe into the stump and leaned on the handle, his shoulders slumping. My strength means nothing against their power, Sophia. Against their guns, and their laws, and their money. His voice dropped to a whisper. I thought I could protect you both. But what am I except a scarred mountain man who can't even keep his family safe? We are safe, Sophia insisted, stepping closer. Safe because we're together. This isn't just your fight anymore, Andrew. What we have here, it's real. The marriage may have started as convenience, but you know it's grown into something true. A sound from the cabin door made them both turn. Samuel stood there, his small face set with determination. I won't leave me, Tati, he declared. You're my pa now. And Ma too, he added, looking at Sophia. The railroad men can't make me go. Andrew's expression cracked at the boy's words. He crossed to Samuel in 3 long strides and knelt in the snow, gathering him close. Sophia joined them, her hand finding Andrew's shoulder. They stood there together as snowflakes began to drift down, a family forged by circumstance but bound by something deeper. Finally, Andrew straightened, something new kindling in his eyes. The county courthouse, he said suddenly, 20 miles south. If we can prove our claim, prove this is a real homestead with a real family. Yes, Sophia breathed. Then she remembered something. Wait. She hurried inside to her valise, tucked beneath their bed. From its lining, she withdrew a creased envelope, yellowed with age. What's that? Andrew asked as she returned. A letter from my first husband, God rest him. He left me an inheritance, property back east that was sold. The money. She swallowed hard. It was meant to be my dowry for a new marriage. I never told anyone, not even when... The memory of that first humiliation at the train station flickered across her face. Andrew took the letter carefully, as if it might crumble in his calloused hands. This could help prove we're not fraudulent. Show we have means to work the land proper. When do we leave? Samuel asked, practically bouncing with renewed hope. Dawn tomorrow, Andrew decided. We'll need to prepare tonight. Samuel, check the wagon wheels and help me lay in fresh hay for the horses. Sophia. I'll pack provisions, she nodded. And mend your coat. You'll need to look proper for the courthouse. As dusk settled over the valley, they worked with quiet purpose. Andrew cleaned his rifle and checked the wagon's boards while Samuel gathered his precious possessions. The cedar whistle Andrew had carved him, his warmest blanket, and a smooth stone his mother had given him. Sophia sat by the fire, her needle flashing as she reinforced the seams of Andrew's coat. The lantern cast their shadows large against the cabin walls as they made their final preparations. Samuel fell asleep early, worn out by excitement and worry. Sophia tucked him in with extra care, whispering prayers over his dark head. When she returned to the main room, Andrew stood at the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. Thank you, he said without turning. For what? For believing in this. In us. He looked at her then, his expression soft in the lamplight. I was ready to let them win. Ready to believe I deserved to lose everything. Sophia set aside her mending and joined him at the window. The Lord doesn't give us trials we can't overcome, Andrew. Sometimes we just need help seeing the path through them. They stood together, watching snow drift past the glass. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in their warm cabin with Samuel's soft breathing from the corner, they had found their courage again. When the last log settled in the fireplace, they prepared for bed, knowing dawn would come early. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their wagon's tracks, but come morning, they would make new ones, heading south toward hope and justice, a family united against the storm. The wagon creaked through the frozen wilderness, wheels crunching over snow-packed trails. Andrew sat tall in the driver's seat, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. Beside him, Sophia held Samuel close, both wrapped in layers of quilts against the biting wind. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in the vast landscape of white-dusted pines and towering cliffs. Their progress was slow, but steady. Andrew chose each path with care, guiding the horses around patches of ice and deep drifts. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow, marking their passage through the silent mountains. Every few miles, they stopped to rest the team and check the wagon's wheels for ice. "How much further, Pa?" Samuel asked, his voice muffled by the wool scarf Sophia had wrapped around his face. 2 days' ride, if the weather holds, Andrew answered, his eyes scanning the heavy sky. "We'll need to make camp before dark." Sophia squeezed Samuel's shoulder. "Your Pa knows these trails better than anyone. We'll get there safe and sound." Andrew's heart warmed at her words, at the easy way she included him in Samuel's life. He'd never imagined having a family to protect, to fight for. Now he couldn't imagine life without them. As afternoon faded into evening, Andrew guided the wagon into a sheltered grove of pines. The branches hung low with snow, creating a natural shelter from the wind. He helped Sophia and Samuel down, then set about making camp while they gathered dry kindling from beneath the trees. Soon a small fire crackled between 3 snow-cleared logs. Sophia heated a pot of beans while Samuel arranged their bedrolls close to the flames. The boy had grown quiet as night approached, his usual energy dampened by worry. "What happens after court?" Samuel finally asked, his voice small against the darkness pressing in around their fire. "Will we still be together?" Sophia set aside her cooking spoon and drew Samuel into her lap, despite him being nearly too big for such comfort. "Listen to me, Samuel. We are a family now. Nothing the judge says tomorrow can change that. The Lord brought us together, and He'll see us through." Andrew watched them across the flames, his throat tight with emotion. These 2 souls had filled an emptiness in his life he hadn't even known was there. Silently, he offered up thanks to God for bringing them to his valley, for giving him a chance at the family he'd never dared hope for. They ate their simple supper of beans and cornbread, huddled close against the cold. Samuel fell asleep between them, his head pillowed on Sophia's skirts. Andrew draped an extra blanket over him before banking the fire for the night. "Sleep," he told Sophia gently. "I'll keep watch." She nodded, exhaustion clear in her face, but her hand found his in the darkness. "We'll face whatever comes together," she whispered. The night passed slowly, marked by the soft whisper of wind through pine needles and the occasional cry of a distant coyote. Andrew stood guard, his rifle close, though his thoughts were more occupied with prayers than fears of danger. Dawn brought them back to the trail, and by the next afternoon the county seat came into view, a cluster of wooden buildings rising from the valley floor. Andrew felt Sophia stiffen beside him as they approached. This was where their future would be decided. The courthouse loomed before them, its weathered boards and tall windows imposing against the gray sky. Outside, several well-dressed men lounged on the steps, including the railroad foreman. Their smirks followed Andrew's family as they climbed down from the wagon. Inside, the courtroom was crowded with curious onlookers. The judge, a lean man with sharp eyes, called their case first. Andrew stepped forward, his back straight despite the weight of all those staring eyes. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady, "I come before you to defend my lawful claim to McGraw Valley. It's been in my family 20 years, worked honest and true. I have a legal marriage." He gestured to Sophia, who stood, proudly beside him. "And we're raising a son together." The railroad foreman snorted from his seat. "A convenient marriage, Your Honor, arranged solely to circumvent progress. And the boy? A half-breed charity case, nothing more." Andrew's hands clenched, but Sophia touched his arm lightly. She stepped forward, reaching into her pocket to withdraw a worn envelope. "If it please the court," she said clearly, "I wish to present evidence of our marriage's legal standing." She handed the letter to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The room fell silent as the judge read, his eyebrows rising slightly, "This appears to be a formal inheritance document," he announced, "granting Mrs. McGraw significant property rights and funds from her previous marriage in Massachusetts." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The railroad men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The money was meant as a dowry," Sophia explained, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I brought it west to start a new life. When Andrew and I married, it became part of our household assets, proving our union carries full legal weight." The foreman shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. Some convenient letter doesn't change the fact that the railroad needs—" "Silence," the judge commanded, his gavel cracking against the desk. "I've heard enough for today. This matter requires careful consideration of all evidence presented. I will announce my decision tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. He fixed the railroad men with a stern look. "Until then, I expect all parties to maintain their distance from one another." Outside the courthouse, Andrew helped Sophia and Samuel into the wagon. They made their way to the only boarding house in town, a narrow building with peeling paint and drafty windows. The room they rented was small, with 2 narrow beds and a washstand, but it was clean. Samuel fell asleep quickly, worn out by the day's tension. Sophia sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead. Andrew watched them from across the room, his heart full of love and fear for what tomorrow might bring. When she finally joined him by the window, Sophia's face was drawn with exhaustion. Without a word, she took his scarred hand in both of hers. Together, they knelt beside the bed. "Lord," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "we ask for your guidance and protection. Whatever comes tomorrow, help us face it with courage and faith. Keep our family together, if it be your will." "Amen," Andrew murmured, squeezing her fingers gently. They remained kneeling together in the dim room, their joined hands a bridge between them, while outside snow began to fall softly over the sleeping town. Tomorrow would bring its answer, but tonight they had their prayers, their hope, and each other. Morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting long golden bars across the worn wooden floor. The room was packed to standing, with settlers and townsfolk pressed shoulder to shoulder. Even the back doorway was filled with curious onlookers, all straining to hear the judge's decision. Andrew McGraw stood straight and tall before the bench, his broad shoulders set with determination. Sophia stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on Samuel's shoulder. The boy fidgeted with nervous energy, but kept silent as the judge shuffled his papers. The railroad foreman lounged against the front rail, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. His confidence wavered slightly when the judge fixed him with a stern gaze. "Having reviewed all evidence presented," the judge began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room, "including the legal documentation of marriage, the McGraw family's continuous residence, and Mrs. McGraw's independent property rights." He paused, looking directly at Andrew. "I find in favor of the defendants. The McGraw homestead claim stands." For a moment, the courtroom remained perfectly still. Then Samuel's voice broke the silence. "We won, Pa! We won!" His joyful shout sparked a wave of applause from the gathered settlers. Andrew's face split into a broad grin as he swept Samuel up into his arms, lifting the boy high. His deep laugh boomed across the room, years of worry falling away in that moment of pure joy. Samuel wrapped his arms around Andrew's neck, practically vibrating with excitement. Sophia pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. When Andrew reached for her with his free arm, she stepped into his embrace without hesitation. They stood together, a family united, while the applause continued around them. The railroad foreman's face had turned an ugly shade of red. He slammed his hat onto his head and stormed toward the door, shouldering roughly past the celebrating townsfolk. His departure only seemed to fuel the celebration. Several of their neighbors pushed forward to shake Andrew's hand or pat his shoulder. Old Mrs. Peterson, who ran the general store, clasped Sophia's hands in hers. "It's about time somebody stood up to those railroad bullies," she declared. "You've done us all proud." The judge had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. "Court is adjourned," he announced, but there was a hint of satisfaction in his voice as he gathered his papers. Outside the courthouse, the morning had bloomed into a perfect spring day. Birds sang in the budding trees, and a warm breeze carried the scent of new grass. Andrew helped Sophia and Samuel into their wagon, accepting more handshakes and congratulations from passing townspeople. "You showed real courage, McGraw," called Reverend Thomas, stepping down from the courthouse stairs. "All of you did." The Lord surely smiled on justice today. The wagon rattled and creaked as they made their way out of town, but none of them minded the familiar discomfort. Samuel kept turning around to wave at people until the buildings disappeared behind them. The trail home seemed shorter somehow, brightened by their shared joy. "Can we have a celebration supper?" Samuel asked, bouncing slightly on the wagon seat. "With your special biscuits, Ma." Sophia laughed, the sound carrying clearly over the wagon's noise. "I reckon we can manage that," she said, reaching out to smooth his unruly hair. They were still a mile from home when they spotted the first wagon ahead of them on the trail. As they drew closer, they recognized the Hendersons from the next valley over. Sarah Henderson stood up in their wagon and waved enthusiastically. "News travels fast," Andrew remarked, a smile tugging at his mouth. More wagons and riders appeared as they approached their cabin. It seemed half the county had gathered to celebrate their victory. Women bustled around, setting out covered dishes on makeshift tables made from planks and sawhorses. Men stood in small groups talking and laughing. "Land's sake," Sophia whispered, taking in the scene. "I've never seen such a gathering." Andrew helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and something warm and tender passed between them. Sarah Henderson hurried forward, carrying a cloth-wrapped loaf of fresh bread. "We all wanted to show our support," she explained, pressing the warm bread into Sophia's hands. "Your stand against the railroad gives hope to every settler in these parts." More gifts appeared, jars of preserved fruit, packets of precious seeds for spring planting, even a hand-sewn quilt from the church ladies' circle. Each offering came with words of congratulation and support, showing how deeply their victory had touched the community. Samuel darted between the wagons, proudly telling anyone who would listen about the court proceedings. Several times they heard his clear voice declare, "My pa stood right up to them." Andrew's heart swelled each time the boy claimed him so naturally as father. The impromptu celebration lasted until sunset, when the spring chill began to settle into the valley. One by one, their neighbors bid them farewell and headed home, leaving behind enough food to feed them for a week. Finally, the cabin grew quiet except for the crackling of the hearth fire. Samuel had fallen asleep in the new quilt, curled up like a cat in the warm corner near the fireplace. His face was peaceful, all traces of worry erased by the day's joy. Sophia moved around the cabin, putting away the gifts and tidying up, her skirts swishing softly against the plank floor. Andrew watched her from his chair by the fire, his heart so full it felt near to bursting. The flames cast a gentle glow across her face, highlighting the quiet contentment in her expression. When she finished her tasks, she came to stand beside his chair. Without a word, he reached for her hand, drawing her down to sit beside him. Their fingers entwined naturally, fitting together as if they had always belonged that way. "Sophia," Andrew said softly, his deep voice roughened by emotion. He paused, gathering his courage. The words he had held back for so long could no longer be contained. "I love you." She turned to face him, tears gleaming in her eyes. "And I love you, Andrew," she whispered back. The fire popped and sparked, sending a shower of golden embers up the chimney. Samuel murmured something in his sleep and snuggled deeper into his quilt. Outside, a whippoorwill called softly in the gathering dusk. Andrew lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to Sophia's fingers. All the fear and loneliness of his past seemed to fade away in the warmth of this moment. Here, with his wife and son beside him, he was finally, truly, home. Spring burst into the valley like God's own promise. The last patches of snow melted into rushing creeks that sang down the mountainside. Andrew worked the rich earth with steady purpose, dropping corn kernels into neat furrows while Samuel scattered beans between the rows, his small hands careful with each seed. Near the cabin, Sophia's washing fluttered in the warm breeze. Her mother's shawl, draped across her shoulders, rippled like a banner of hope against the blue sky. All around them, the valley thrummed with new life, meadowlarks trilling their morning songs, fresh grass pushing up through last year's leaves, and the sound of Samuel's laughter carrying across the fields. When Sunday came, neighbors gathered under the budding aspens for hymn singing. Samuel's cedar whistle joined the congregation's voices, his face glowing with pride as he played the simple tunes Andrew had taught him. The same townsfolk who once feared Andrew's scarred face now looked to him as a protector, someone who had stood against injustice and won. Later, as lamplight cast its golden glow across their supper table, Sophia's voice grew soft with wonder. "I thought no one wanted me," she said, looking at Andrew. "But then you took my hand that day, and never let go." Andrew's fingers found hers across the worn tablecloth, gripping firmly as Samuel leaned against them both. The lamp burned low, its warm light blessing a family made whole by love and redemption. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.